We are tonight in a study of the book of Jude. We're in number 2. Forgot to make a slide number 2 that says verses 5 to 16, but that's where we are in the book of Jude with the exhortation that we contend earnestly for the faith. Last time we saw that we were to make an earnest contention, a faithful contention for that which was once for all delivered to the saints. Those things concerning Jesus Christ. These false teachers that are going to come and beset these brethren and plague them and be such a pain for them, these brethren are to reject, instead holding true to that which had already been given them. So these heretical folks, we found out in verse 4, were going to be creeping in. They were marked out long time before for this condemnation. They were ungodly persons who turned the grace of God to licentiousness, and they deny the only Master and Lord. Well, we've only got one Master and Lord to get us out of here safely, and they're on his wrong side. And so Jude now goes on to explain about them and how they are, as he's going to tell us about them as bad actors. And he's going to compare them to the rogues gallery of the Old Testament. The heretics, the troublemakers, the unfaithful, the wicked, the worst. And so we start with the trio of Old Testament examples, verses 5 to 7. Now I desire to remind you, though you know all things once for all, that the Lord, after saving a people out of Egypt, subsequently destroyed those who did not believe, and angels who did not keep their own domain, but abandoned their proper abode. He has kept in eternal bonds under darkness for judgment of the great day, just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them, since they, in the same way as these, indulged in gross immorality and went after strange flesh, are exhibited as an example in undergoing the punishment of eternal fire. Then we're going to find out these fellows are the same way, and that they are not in touch with any kind of spiritual, and it hardly seems even at times physical, reality. And so we'll start with our sober warnings of this rogues gallery. First, we start with the wilderness generation. One of the most common figures of the Old Testament is a warning of judgment, as a warning of the things that we ought not to do. And so he says, yeah, you know them. Verse 5 began, you know these things once for all. I can't tell you anything more about them that you don't already know. I'm just going to remind you that the Lord once saved a people, and then he destroyed them. He saved them, then destroyed them. I'm not sure what this does to the doctrine of once saved, always saved. But here, these people brought out of Egypt by God's mighty hand, those who were given the sign of the 10 plagues against the Egyptians to bring them out, those who were safe in their homes by the blood of the Passover lamb when the death angel came, those who cried to the Lord at the edge of the sea and had the sea divide, and they walked through on dry land, and then their enemies trying to do the same were all swallowed up. Those who were then taken to the wilderness, and they heard the voice of God deliver the 10 commandments on the holy mountain. They saw the mountain smoke and quake. They were given water from the rock that followed them, that was Christ. They were fed manna from heaven. They were promised a great land and refused to take it because they didn't believe that God, who'd brought them safely thus far, would take them safely to the place that he'd prepared. And so, here is this common example of unfaithfulness. The common example, most common, most regular example of those who did not make it. In 1 Corinthians 10, we have this: I don't want you to be unaware, brethren, of our fathers who were under the sea, under the cloud. They passed through the sea. They were all baptized into Moses and the cloud and the sea. They ate the same spiritual food. They drank the same spiritual drink. They were all drinking from the spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ. In 1 Corinthians 10:5, nevertheless, with most of them God was not well pleased, for they were laid low in the wilderness. In the Hebrew letter, the same folks are brought up who provoked them, Hebrews 3:16, when they heard. Indeed, did not all those who came out of Egypt led by Moses, with whom was he angry for 40 years? Was it not those who sinned, whose bodies fell in the wilderness? And to whom did he swear they would not enter his rest? But those who were disobedient. And so we see they were not able to enter because of unbelief. Therefore let us fear, while a promise remains of entering his rest, that any one of you should seem to come short of it. For indeed we have had the good news preached to us, just as they also, but the word they heard did not profit them, for it was not united by faith in those who heard. So here are people, these ones who've crept in unawares, denying the only Master and Lord. They are not walking in faith. They are not walking in the faith revealed. They're not walking in the truth of Christ. They are not obedient in any sense. The second great example, the angels who did not keep their own domain. They abandoned their proper abode. He's kept them in eternal bonds under darkness for judgment of that great day. For those who take that Genesis 6 and the Nephilim is something about angels sinning with women, this will be a verse that they'll turn to. I don't know that that's the right way to take the Nephilim. But here are these angels, and so we think about the devil and his angels. Well, here is where he got that merry band. Angels who don't keep their domain. Angels who abandon their abode. Their domain and abode was with God as servants. Hebrews 1, he makes his angels to be ministers of fire. They are there to help the saints. In some way, these got so crossways that instead of trying to help the saints, led by Satan, who is their head, he who is the accuser of the brethren, they tried to destroy the saints. They troubled the Jews in the time of the Gospels, and Jesus and the apostles cast many of them out. These folks end up, it says, now in eternal bonds under darkness for the judgment of the great day. So they're imprisoned. They're in bonds. They're not free to roam around and do what they want. It's one of the reasons, there's several, but one of the reasons I don't believe that we see people who are possessed today, and why I don't think we need an office of exorcist, as the Catholic Church has and still uses and sends out occasionally, although maybe not quite so often as the movies make it appear. But these angels, God put them in bonds of darkness for judgment. Well, if God can take care of them, he can take care, and he will take care of these. In the parallel passage of 2 Peter, Peter says this, God did not spare the angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to pits of darkness reserved for judgment. So here it said that they didn't keep their domain, they didn't keep their proper abode. In Peter, it just says that they sinned. And so we have more knowledge, certainly, of their result than of their action. And the result is in bonds, in darkness, waiting for judgment, or on the far side of that, it'll only be worse. And so these folks are on that path. These folks are on that way. And those who would fall in league with them and follow them, where do we think they'll go to? Third one, just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities round about. Well, this is where Bible trivia time comes in. Who knows those other cities? It's Abna and Zeboam. Yeah, you see me looking down at my notes because I often do forget what those other two little towns were. Would have been a fifth one too, but Lot asked for permission to flee there, and it got spared. But those cities the Lord overthrew in his anger. Deuteronomy 29. If there's another great example constantly through the scripture, beside the wilderness generation, of God's judgment on wickedness, it's Sodom and Gomorrah. There are approximately, and I counted this one time and wrote it down in these notes, 27. That's an actual literal number. Your counting may come up one or two more, depending on how you count more oblique references. But about 27 times through the Old Testament, which averages nearly, 2 books out of 3, there's a reference to Sodom and Gomorrah as an example of punishment of the wicked. These, they indulged in gross immorality. And it wasn't just that the immorality there was gross. The immorality there was pervasive. Abraham pled with God so that there might be a sparing of the cities, if but 50 righteous could be found. And of course, we know that 50 righteous could not be found. And so then I think Abraham knew that. So he said, but Lord, what if we're 10 shy? What if there's 40? What if there's 30? What if there's 20? What if there's 10? I think Abraham knew how few righteous folks there'd be. I still think he liked them. He probably had fond affection for a number of them. He had, after all, rescued them at great risk to himself. When Lot had been captured along with them by the kings of the north. So Abraham was acquainted with these folks. Abraham pled with God for these folks. And still, though, there weren't 10. Appears there must have been just but the one, just righteous Lot. And so it seems that great wickedness was too much to bear, that God said, no, we can't have that. And so Jude says, remember those folks. They were grossly immoral. They went after strange flesh. Of course, for a long time, the word we now use, homosexual, didn't exist. It's actually, I think 1946, first time that word appears in some of our translations of the Bible, because that just was a word we didn't use. The Old English word for that activity now used commonly to be described with the word homosexual was the word sodomite. It's somebody who did the ways of Sodom. And then we think about the story when Lot was rescued, how the men of the city gathered around Lot's house so that they might know and abuse the angels who came to rescue him. They were blinded, and it says in the text, they wearied themselves to find the door. Well, there's the great example in the Old Testament of unfaithfulness and of punishment. Fire and brimstone rains down upon them. Only Lot and his family are spared. His wife does not make it all the way to safety because she breaks the prohibition of turning back. Lot and his daughters come out, but certainly his daughters morally were not unscathed by their time in the city, and more immorality results. Well, they got the punishment of eternal fire. They had fire and brimstone in this life, and eternal fire waiting in the next. Well, there's the great examples of wickedness. Here's bad actors all the way down. And Jude says, these folks are the ones I need to use for comparison's sake to talk about the ones who are among you. This is how bad they are, verse 8. Yet in the same way, these men, in the same way. I didn't bring those 3 things up for history lesson. I brought them up to remind you that this is what these men are. By dreaming, and defiling the flesh, they reject authority. They revile angelic majesty. Their mind is in a dreamlike state. There's no reality to them or in them. They're no more based on facts than is a dream. Last night I had a bit of a weird dream. I guess actually it's early this morning. I won't bother with any of the details because it's not that important. And by tomorrow I will have forgotten it. It's kind of strange that I remember a dream even now, some 12, 14 hours later. But it wasn't reality. It wasn't reality based. It doesn't matter. These guys, though, are living in a non-reality based world. They're acting like what they imagine in their darkness of their soiled consciences, defiled then in the flesh. They're acting like what their perverted mind dreams up is right, and they're defiling and perverting their flesh. I cannot help but think of some of those today in our culture who are defiling their flesh on a dream of how they identify themselves and saying that we must all recognize that as reality. No, it has no basis in reality. These folks who think that men are women and women are men, that this is a changeable thing, this is not a fixed and immutable fact of biology. Now, I realize there are a few folks where there's a medical condition in the some degree of syndrome called intersex, where there are ambiguous things in the way their body was formed. It's a genetic defect. It's about as common as cystic fibrosis, about exactly the same numbers. And so the great majority of people who say, no, I'm this or that is contrary to biology, it's nothing about a genetic syndrome. That's not all that common. It's about a defiled imagination. It's about a dream that ends up wrecking their minds and their bodies. These false teachers, these Gnostics, who separated physical acts from spiritual reality, they did some of the same things. In a lot of ways, a lot of the things today, they are reminiscent of the ancient Gnostic heresy. Actually, they have some of the same philosophical underpinnings, that what I think is more important than what is, that I can make my own reality. The Gnostic pagans and the Gnostic influenced Christians believe such things and are here spoken of in very direct and very, unflattering terms. And today people are making the same mistakes and doing the same things. So they dream, they defile their flesh. They reject reality. These folks also are, it says, reviling angelic majesties. This is how far they go in rejecting authority, that the angels of heaven are some of the things that they pervert in their teaching, they disregard, and they disrespect. So I don't know that angelology and some of those things were central to their theology, or just sort of the extreme end of it to let you know how far these folks had gone. We have in this the great example in the middle of restraint and of just sticking to what the Lord has said with one of the true angels, Michael, the archangel. Michael and Gabriel are only two angels that are named. Michael, the archangel, he comes up several times in Scripture. Here it mentions an incident where he contended with the devil. It says he disputed with the devil, verse 9, and argued over the body of Moses. Did not dare pronounce against him a railing judgment, but said, the Lord rebuke you. And so in Deuteronomy 34, there's the incident recorded of the death of Moses, that Moses died in the land of Moab. He'd recently been able to go up on the mountain and see into the promised land, but not go into the promised land, as he had not respected the Lord. In one thing, I would have done far worse, but in one thing, in leading the people, he had not properly honored God. And there was a consequence for that, though the Lord was certainly gracious to him. And the Lord had him go up see the promised land from the mountain. And then he died, according to the word of the Lord, Deuteronomy 34:6. And he was buried in the valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor. It says no one knows his burial place to this day. I do just think about what, in so many ways, would have been a trap and a stumbling block to know where Moses was buried and to know of his body. We think about the shrines that would have been built. We think about the people who had fought over that land and that acreage where Moses was interned. We also might think of what Satan would have done with the body had he had the enemies of God go and find it and dig it up. And so to save dignity for the body of Moses, or to save Israel from having a place of stumbling at a pilgrimage site that would have been made to Moses' grave, or for whatever causes else that Satan could have used for embarrassment or hindrance with the body of Moses, the Lord in his goodness and compassion left the written record of Moses, and so his burial, as it were, is in the Word. When we want to go see and honor Moses, we go read of the record of what he revealed and of his life. There isn't a physical place with a snack bar and all the trappings of a pilgrimage site. And so the devil wanted the body, and the Lord didn't want him to have the body. The person given security detail at this incident was Michael, and he contended with Satan over the body of Moses. And as Michael the archangel contended with one as wicked as Satan, he did not say to Satan any curses, any insults, any untoward or harsh language, but even to the devil himself, he just said, "The Lord rebuke you." And I think about the things that people say about one another. People say in anger to family members who they supposedly love and probably said they would love, and people go, "Yeah, he loves him, he just got mad." Either to family members or to neighbors, or heaven help us if there's some kind of political thing come up. We think about the Apostle Paul, who greatly restrained himself in all respects. And then there's one time where in ignorance he slipped just a little. In Acts 23:5, the Apostle Paul was ordered to be struck when he didn't give an answer that the Jewish court liked. And to the man who ordered him to be struck, the Apostle Paul said, "God will strike you, you whitewashed wall." The men there said, "Dude, what are you saying? You can't talk that way to the high priest." And Paul said, "Oh, I did not realize he was the high priest." So even the corrupt high priest, that office of folks who were so corrupted that they condemned Jesus, the people who are supposed to be the representatives of law, of God's law and God's system of mercy to the people and the sacrifices, were having an apostle of God hit contrary to the law. Still, the Apostle Paul said, "I should not have said that much against him." And so, there's an example for us. And we think about how people speak about our rulers today. Ought not be that way. Michael's example rebukes us. Paul's example rebukes us when we get carried away with insulting language, especially over things of this world. So, in this, verse 10, we see these men have no such restraint. And here's a marking. Here's a dividing between men of God and men of the world. The men of God are a restrained people. We are taught to restrain our tongue. Now, James tells us it's hard to do. Who could restrain the tongue? It's like a viper, the Psalms would say. It's restless. It's full of evil. It's a raging fire. But still, if you don't bridle your tongue, your religion's worthless, right? And so, these fellows are unbridled. More than unbridled, they're unhinged. Verse 10, they revile things they don't understand. And the things which they know by instinct, like unreasoning animals, by these they're destroyed. If they don't understand it, they speak against it. They don't know what they're talking about when they're issuing so many high-sounding pronouncements. They don't know. Doesn't stop them that they don't know. Doesn't humble them that they don't know. Doesn't restrain them because there's no humility in them. They think they know, though they don't. And so what they don't know, they revile. But the things they know by instinct. So the things that are so simple and basic that you should just know it instinctually. You should know it like your dog knows things. You should know it like your cat knows things. Your cat knows how to act. He's got his instinct. Well, there's a certain base level of instinct we should have. But these folks, like unreasoning animals, by these they're destroyed. And so they're like the horse that kicks the guy that feeds it. They're like the dog that bites the hand that feeds it. They're like an animal, and they turn on those who would try to help. They turn on those in a destructive way just because that's what they are and who they are. So there's certain things that they should be restrained by. Some basic common decency, just some basic understanding of most fundamental morality. Unrestrained, unhinged. Verse 11, and there we'll stop. I thought we'd go to verse 16. We'll just take this one. One more verse. Go to verse 11. Verse 11, woe to them. Woe. That's a much bigger word than we give it credit for. Woe. Woe from God. Woe from inspired people. Woe to those cities in the Gospels who didn't believe in Jesus. Woes to the world and the judgments being poured out in the book of Revelation. When we're in deep distress, like Job or some of the prophets, woe is me. Woe. This is a serious situation. This is the opposite of blessing. This is being under a curse. Woe to them. And now we got three quickies. We had three quick examples. We had the three slightly longer examples. None were very long. Now we got three short ones. Here's again. Bad actors. Woe to them. They've gone the way of Cain. For they have rushed headlong into the error of Balaam, and they have perished in the rebellion of Korah. Well, each of those quick references could be a lesson in Old Testament evil. Cain, the one who did not offer sacrifice by faith, almost certainly, maybe not 100% certainly, but probably pretty close. Cain was supposed to offer a blood sacrifice like his brothers did. Blood sacrifices from the beginning have been associated with sin and have been part of the worship of God. It's not the only thing ever sacrificed. There were offerings that were drink offerings. There were offerings of fruit and grain and various things like that, first fruits particularly. But in any case, Cain didn't worship by faith. Then Cain got jealous, and he became envious of his brother, and he hated his brother. In 1 John 3, we're not to hate because everyone who hates is a murderer, and it gives the example of Cain. So here is the unfaithful, hateful man. So the first of the three quick examples, the man who is unfaithful and hateful and a murderer, a man whom God specifically tried to intervene with and said, why are you like this? Why are you having this issue of your countenance being fallen? Just do right and you'll get over this. And then he still went and slew his brother. So unfaithful, envious, rejecting God's intervention, murderous. These guys are like that. How are you going to reason with Cain? How are you going to reason with these guys? No, you need to avoid them. You need to refute them. They rush headlong into the error of Balaam. So they're Balaam, the greedy prophet, the man who for money taught the people of Israel how to sin, Numbers chapter 22. He was a known prophet of God. He was hired by Balak to curse Israel. He knew as a prophet he could only say what God would allow him to say, and he was warned of God not to say anything beyond what God had said. He was had his animal, had his donkey stop in the road when the angel was there, and he had gotten an argument with his donkey. His donkey saved his life, and he still got into an argument with it. And then that did not keep him. I think on that occasion he probably would have gone beyond what God said without the angel and the donkey incident, which is why God put the angel in the way and allowed the donkey to speak. The donkey rebuked the madness of the prophet, we find in another text. But still later, he wanted the money so badly, he found a way that he did not have to pronounce the curse on Israel. He taught Israel how to sin so they would be cursed themselves. There's a curse in sin. And he had Israel tempted to bring that curse down upon themselves, the sins of immorality and idolatry. And so first, second, 6 commandments, had them break 3 commandments and fall under condemnation. Then the rebellion of Korah, our third one and final one of the quickies here tonight. The man who was a Levite, the man whose descendants, the sons of Korah, are faithful in the temple. We are studying in the book of Psalms, so many of the Psalms of the sons of Korah. But Korah himself and some of his immediate family, they perished in the wilderness, not of old age, marching out the time under the curse of God like most folks, but direct action of God to have the earth swallow them. Because though Korah was a Levite, he didn't want to be a servant in the tabernacle. He wanted to be the leader. He rebelled against Moses and Aaron's authority, almost certainly so he could take the high priest office for himself, because after all, who deserved it more than him? Just ask him. He led a rebellion against the authorized leaders of God's people. He had 200 men, head men of Israel, to follow him. So he must have been a man of some influence, persuasion, and charismatic ability. He led them into destruction. He led them in a way that the earth swallowed them. These folks must have been liked because the people of Israel grumbled greatly over it when they were gone. And then 14,700 people the next day were killed by the deadly serpents that God sent among the people for their grumbling over God removing this bad actor. So, in all of these, 3 big examples, 3 quick examples, instruction about these men along the way. We find men unrestrained. We find men reviling authority. We find men doing what they want to do. And so here are selfish, self-driven men, ambitious, but ambitious not for the Lord, but for themselves. And so under the great penalty. So that's verses 5 through 11 of the book of Jude. Lord willing, next time we will take this up in verse 12.